Laura Caldwell believed that silence had a texture. In the cavernous penthouse she shared with her husband, it was a cold, smooth surface, like the polished marble of the kitchen island she was currently wiping down for the third time. It wasn't a peaceful silence, it was the quiet of a held breath, an absence of warmth that left a perpetual chill in the air. Laura, a librarian by trade and temperament, had once loved the quiet world of books. Now, silence was just the space between David's criticisms. When the heavy front door clicked open, the texture of the silence shattered. David Sterling entered, not as a husband returning home, but as a king inspecting his domain. He dropped his leather briefcase by the door with a thud that echoed his disapproval. "Laura," he called out, his voice a sharp instrument cutting through the stillness. She emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a tea towel. At 42, she had a gentle face that seemed to apologize for taking up space, her soft brown hair pulled back in a simple, practical knot. David, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than her monthly salary had ever been, scanned her from head to toe. His gaze lingered on her comfortable sweater and jeans. "We have the gallery opening tonight. The one I've been talking about for a month. You're not actually planning on wearing that, are you?" Laura's hands tightened on the towel. "Of course not, David. I was just cleaning up." He sighed, a dramatic exhalation of impatience. "This isn't some local library bake sale, Laura. This is the Hallstrom exhibition. My biggest potential investor, Marcus Thorne, will be there. I need you to look the part of a successful man's wife, not a small-town bookkeeper." He didn't mean Marcus Thorne. He meant Rose Thorne, a detail he often confused. Every word was a carefully placed stone, building the wall between them a little higher. She had long ago given up her job at the New York Public Library at his insistence. He'd called it a hobby, something that distracted from her real duties as his wife. In truth, he couldn't stand that her quiet world of knowledge was something he couldn't control or monetize. She retreated into herself, her vibrant mind dimming under the constant pressure of his expectations. "I have the blue dress laid out," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "The one you picked out." "Good," he said, already moving toward his home office, his attention diverted to more important matters. "Just try to be engaging. Don't just stand in a corner staring at the floor. Smile. Laugh at my jokes. Pretend you're enjoying yourself. For me." For you, Laura thought, the words a bitter taste in her mouth. Everything was always for him. Her wardrobe, her friends, or lack thereof. Her abandoned career, her very personality had been sanded down and reshaped to fit his life. As she walked to their bedroom to prepare for the evening, she caught her reflection in the hallway's floor-to-ceiling mirror. She saw a pale, hesitant woman staring back, a ghost haunting a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Tonight, she would once again put on the costume of Mrs. David Sterling, a role she played with increasing weariness. She just had to survive a few more hours of it. She had no idea the performance was about to be canceled for good. The Soho Art Gallery was a sensory assault. The cavernous white space hummed with the pretentious chatter of New York's elite, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the ambient drone of some incomprehensible electronic music. Stark, oversized canvases of clashing colors and twisted metal sculptures populated the room, each with a price tag that could fund a library for a decade. Laura felt like a drab sparrow in a flock of peacocks. Her sapphire blue dress, while elegant, felt like a costume, and she clutched her small purse like a shield. David was in his element, and he moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark, a charming smile fixed on his face as he shook hands and clapped backs. Laura trailed in his wake, a silent ornamental shadow. He would introduce her with a casual wave, "And this is my wife, Laura," before immediately turning his full attention back to the men in expensive suits. She was an afterthought, a required accessory. They finally cornered their target. Marcus Thorne, a silver-haired titan of industry with shrewd, assessing eyes. "Marcus, good to see you," David boomed, his voice oozing manufactured warmth. "And this is my lovely wife, Laura." Marcus Thorne gave Laura a polite, if brief, nod. "A pleasure, Mrs. Sterling." Laura offered a small, shy smile. "Please, call me Laura." David shot her a look, a micro-expression of pure annoyance. He had told her to be engaging, but not to actually engage. He launched into a monologue about a new development project, his voice growing more animated as he tried to impress Thorne. Laura stood silently, feeling the familiar heat of invisibility creeping over her. She took a sip of her champagne, the bubbles tasting like anxiety. David, sensing he was losing Thorne's interest, decided to use his wife as a prop for a self-deprecating joke. "It's a complex deal," he said with a laugh, gesturing vaguely at Laura. "Almost too complex for my Laura to understand. Her world is more books and quiet corners, a different speed entirely." Thorne's expression didn't change, but Laura felt the sting of the casual dismissal. Then, David made his move. As a waiter passed with a tray of red wine, David turned abruptly, his elbow connecting squarely with Laura's glass. The dark liquid splashed down the front of her blue dress, a violent, ugly stain. "Oh, for God's sake, Laura!" David exclaimed, his voice far too loud. The nearby conversations faltered as heads turned. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Can I take you anywhere?" "You're a liability." His words, laced with venom and feigned exasperation, were for the audience. He was painting a picture of himself as a long-suffering husband, burdened by a clumsy, simple-minded wife. The humiliation was a physical blow. She could feel the stares of the other guests, a mixture of pity, scorn, and secondhand embarrassment. Marcus Thorne looked deeply uncomfortable. The mask of politeness was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine disgust directed at David. But Laura didn't see it. All she saw were judging eyes. I'm so sorry," she stammered. Not to David, but to the air itself. She turned and fled, the sound of David's hollow apologies to his investor chasing her as she sought refuge from the crushing weight of her shame. Laura pushed through a set of heavy glass doors, escaping the gallery's bright lights and buzzing crowd for the relative sanctuary of a long, quiet hallway. It was lined with polished marble, the cool stone a stark contrast to the burning heat in her cheeks. She leaned against the wall, the back of her head pressing into the cold surface as she squeezed her eyes shut, fighting a losing battle against tears. The red wine stain felt like a brand, a public declaration of her inadequacy. David's voice echoed in her head. "You're a liability." A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. "He's a fool." The voice was low and steady, emanating from the far end of the hallway, which was cast in shadow. It was a woman's voice, imbued with a confidence that Laura hadn't possessed in years. Laura's eyes snapped open. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and Laura's breath caught in her throat. It was like looking into a strange, distorted mirror. The woman standing before her was her exact double. Same height, same facial structure, same deep brown eyes. But the similarities ended there. Where Laura's posture was slumped in defeat, this woman stood ramrod straight, her shoulders back in a posture of innate command. Where Laura wore a simple dress now ruined by a wine stain, the woman wore a sharp, exquisitely tailored black power suit. Her hair was cut into a sleek, no-nonsense bob, and her expression was one of intense, piercing focus. The woman took another step forward, her gaze sweeping over Laura, taking in the tear-streaked face and the stained dress with an almost clinical assessment. "I saw what happened back there," she said, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its edge. "That man is your husband?" Laura could only nod, her mind reeling. She felt a wave of vertigo, as if the marble floor had tilted beneath her feet. Who are you?" she finally managed to whisper, the words feeling foreign and inadequate. The woman's lips curved into a wry, knowing smile. "My name is Rose Thorne. I'm a corporate investigator." The name pricked at Laura's memory. David had been talking to a Marcus Thorne. "Thorne?" Laura breathed. "The investor?" "My adoptive father," Rose confirmed, her eyes never leaving Laura's face. "I was adopted as a baby, from St. Jude's Orphanage in upstate New York. I was told I was a single birth, no siblings." Laura's world tilted again, this time more violently. The story she had been told by her own adoptive parents, a story she hadn't thought about in decades, came rushing back. "St. Jude's," Laura whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. That's where I was from. They told my parents the same thing. No siblings." For a long moment, the two women just stared at each other, the impossible, earth-shattering truth hanging in the silent hallway between them. They were sisters, identical twins separated at birth, who had just found each other in the most bizarre and painful of circumstances. The tears welling in Laura's eyes were no longer just from humiliation, but from a profound, disorienting shock that was mingled with a tiny, unfamiliar spark of hope. Rose's professional demeanor softened, replaced by a fierce, protective energy. She gently guided Laura to a small, plush bench tucked away in an alcove, away from any prying eyes. "Tell me everything," Rose said, her voice a quiet command. And Laura did. The words came tumbling out, a torrent of suppressed pain and years of quiet desperation. She spoke of her abandoned career, of David's controlling nature, his financial grip, and the constant, soul-crushing belittlement that had eroded her self-worth until she was a mere echo of her former self. She recounted the wine incident not with tears, but with a new, borrowed anger, her story fueled by the validation she saw in her sister's eyes. Rose listened without interruption, her expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. Every word Laura spoke was another piece of evidence, another nail in David Sterling's coffin. As a corporate investigator, Rose's mind was trained to see patterns, to identify weaknesses, and to dismantle fraudulent structures. She was now looking at her sister's marriage as the most hostile of takeovers, one that had stolen Laura's identity and assets. When Laura finally fell silent, emotionally spent, Rose placed a steadying hand on her arm. The touch was firm, grounding. "No more," Rose stated, not as a suggestion, but as a verdict. "This ends tonight." Laura looked up, confused. "What can I do? He controls everything. I have nothing." "That's not true," Rose countered, her eyes gleaming with a strategic fire. "You have me." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We are going to switch places." Laura stared at her, dumbfounded. "Switch? What are you talking about?" "I can't. I wouldn't know what to do." "You don't have to do anything but trust me," Rose insisted. "I will go back into that party as you. I will give your husband a small taste of the woman he's about to be dealing with. You are going to go wait in his car. I'll handle the rest." The plan was insane. It was the stuff of movies, of wild, unbelievable fantasies. The librarian in Laura, the part of her that craved order and predictability, screamed in protest. It was too risky, too dangerous. What if David realized? What if she got them both into trouble? But then she looked at Rose. She saw in her sister's face a strength she herself had lost, a resolve she desperately craved. She thought of the years of humiliation, of the lonely silence of the penthouse, of the woman she used to be. The desperation for change finally outweighed the fear of the unknown. A flicker of her old self, the brave part of her that had moved to New York City alone all those years ago, reignited. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Okay," Laura whispered, the single word feeling like the most significant act of rebellion she had ever committed. "Okay." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Rose Thorne's face. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted its prey. "Good," she said. "Now, let's get you out of that dress." Rose led Laura to a large, empty lounge that was being used for coat storage, locking the door behind them. The plan, once verbalized, was set into motion with chilling efficiency. "Give me the dress," Rose commanded, already shrugging out of her sharp blazer. With trembling hands, Laura unzipped the sapphire gown and let it pool at her feet, leaving her in her simple slip. Rose handed her the blazer. "Put this on. It'll cover you." As Laura slid her arms into the silk-lined jacket, she felt an immediate transfer of power. The blazer was structured, heavy, a piece of armor. Rose, now in Laura's wine-stained dress, looked in a small mirror on the wall. She didn't look defeated. She looked like a queen in borrowed clothes. She mussed her sleek hair slightly, mimicking Laura's less severe style. "The car keys?" she asked. Laura handed them over. "The car is a black Mercedes S-Class. Valet ticket is in my purse." Rose took the purse as well. "Go out the side exit at the end of the hall. The valet station is to the right. Give them the ticket, get in the back seat, and lock the doors. Don't speak to anyone. Don't answer his calls. Just wait for me. Can you do that?" Laura nodded, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was no longer just Laura Caldwell, timid wife. She was a co-conspirator, a vital part of a daring operation. Rose gave her sister a final, appraising look. "Head up, Laura, shoulders back. You are not the person who ran out of that room. You are the person who is leaving him. Remember that." With a final, reassuring nod, Rose unlocked the door and strode out, leaving Laura alone in the quiet room. After a moment to gather her courage, Laura followed the instructions perfectly. She walked with a purpose she hadn't felt in a decade, her borrowed blazer a silent promise. She found the valet, handed him the ticket without a word, and slipped into the cool leather sanctuary of the back seat, locking the doors as soon as she was inside. Meanwhile, Rose re-entered the gallery. The change was electric. Heads turned again, but this time with confusion, not pity. The woman who had fled in tears had returned, but she was transformed. Her posture was erect, her chin high. The ugly wine stain on her dress seemed not a mark of shame, but a battle scar. She scanned the room with an unnerving, predatory calm. Her eyes landed on David, who was still trying to smooth things over with Marcus Thorne. David saw her, and his face contorted in a new wave of anger. He excused himself and started marching towards her, his expression thunderous. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he began to hiss as he approached. But he didn't get to finish. The woman he thought was his wife met his furious gaze not with fear, but with a look of such cold, dismissive contempt that it stopped him in his tracks. The entire dynamic of the room had shifted, centered on this one woman who now radiated an aura of formidable, inexplicable power. On this one woman, Rose let David get within 2 feet of her before she spoke, her voice perfectly modulated, quiet enough to feel intimate, yet loud enough for Marcus Thorne and several other nearby investors to hear every single word. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice a blade of ice. "Don't you dare speak to me like that ever again." David was so taken aback he was momentarily speechless. This was not the Laura he knew. This woman's eyes were like chips of dark, unyielding stone. "Where have you been?" he finally sputtered, trying to regain his footing. "Making a fool of me?" Rose laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound that made him flinch. "You think I'm the one making a fool of you, David?" she said, her gaze flicking pointedly across the room. It settled on a young, stunning woman in a tight red dress who was watching them with a nervous expression. "You should probably have a chat with your assistant, Tiffany Vance. Perhaps ask her about the business trips you've been taking together. The one to the Caymans last month, for instance." "I'm sure she has a lot to say!" A collective gasp rippled through their immediate audience. Tiffany Vance's face went white with panic. David looked as if he'd been struck, his face draining of all color. He opened his mouth to deny it, but Rose wasn't finished. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper that was somehow even more terrifying. "But your pathetic little affair is the least of your problems," she continued, her eyes boring into his. "I was just having the most interesting thought about your Hudson Yards prospectus. Specifically, the irregularities in the projected occupancy rates and the shell corporation you used to purchase the land. It seems over-leveraged, highly fraudulent even. I imagine the SEC would find it fascinating." The words, so specific and so damning, landed like body blows. Marcus Thorne, who had been observing the entire exchange, now took a deliberate step back from David, his expression one of pure, unadulterated alarm. The other investors who had overheard began murmuring amongst themselves, their friendly demeanors evaporating. They were distancing themselves from him, right before his eyes. David was imploding. The confident, arrogant real estate developer was gone, replaced by a terrified man cornered by a nightmare he couldn't comprehend. He stared at the woman in the wine-stained dress, at his wife, but the person looking back at him was a stranger, a brilliant, ruthless executioner. Rose gave him a final, devastating smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "You were worried I would be a mess tonight, David," she said, her voice ringing with triumphant finality. "You have no idea the mess you're in." She turned her back on him then, leaving him standing alone in the center of the room, his career and reputation crumbling into dust around him. The show was over. The drive back to the penthouse was a study in suffocating tension. David drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, trying to decipher the unreadable expression on the woman in the back seat. He was terrified, confused, and seething with a rage that had no outlet. This wasn't Laura. It couldn't be. But who else could it be? He was trapped in a nightmare. The moment they stepped inside the penthouse, the silence shattered. "Who the hell are you?" David roared, whirling to face Rose. His voice, usually a weapon of control, was now ragged with panic. "What was that back there? What game are you playing?" Rose calmly placed Laura's purse on the marble countertop. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him with a profound, chilling pity. "There is no game, David," she said. "This is a reckoning." She pulled out her phone. "My name is Rose Thorne. I'm a corporate investigator. It took me less than an hour of discreet searching on my phone, cross-referencing public records with some less public financial databases I have access to find the skeletons in your closet. And your closet, David, is a mass grave." She began to list her findings with methodical precision: the fraudulent loan applications, the offshore accounts where he skimmed profits, the bribery of a city inspector for the very building they were standing in. Each new revelation was a hammer blow, cracking the foundation of his carefully constructed empire. David sank onto one of his designer bar stools, his face ashen. The fight had completely drained out of him, replaced by the stark, cold terror of a man who knows he is utterly and completely ruined. He wasn't dealing with his meek wife. He was dealing with a professional who held his entire life in her hands. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Here are my terms," Rose said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You will agree to an immediate and uncontested divorce from my sister Laura. You will sign over this penthouse, the Hamptons house, and a settlement of $50 million, all from your legal assets, of which there are just enough to cover it. The rest of your fraudulent empire can burn for all I care. You will sign a permanent no-contact order. You will never speak to her, see her, or contact her in any way for the rest of your life." She paused, letting the weight of her demands sink in. "If you agree, you might have a chance to salvage something from the wreckage before the SEC and the district attorney's office inevitably come for you. If you refuse, or if you cause any trouble for Laura whatsoever," she held up her phone, "I make one phone call, and by sunrise, federal agents will be knocking on your door. Your choice." He stared at her, at the face of his wife contorted into an expression of absolute power. He saw no room for negotiation, no weakness to exploit. He was checked and mated. Defeated, broken, and stripped of all his power, David Sterling slowly, weakly, nodded his head. "I agree," he croaked. The word was a death sentence for his old life, and he knew it. A month later, Laura Caldwell sat in a lawyer's plush office, a pen steady in her hand. She signed the last of the divorce papers with a clear, confident flourish. The name on the document was Laura Caldwell, not Laura Sterling. She was reclaiming not just her freedom, but her very name. David Sterling, as Rose had predicted, was a ruined man. His business partners had abandoned him, and news of an impending federal investigation had leaked to the press, making him a pariah in the city he once ruled. He had signed everything without a fight, a desperate act of self-preservation that had come too late. Laura wasn't in the cold, sterile penthouse anymore. She and Rose now shared a bright, charming apartment in the West Village, filled with overflowing bookshelves, comfortable furniture, and the warm scent of brewing tea. The silence here wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful, filled with the promise of a new beginning. Freed from David's shadow, Laura blossomed. She had cut her hair into a stylish shoulder-length bob, and her wardrobe was now filled with colors and fabrics she loved. The hesitant, apologetic woman was gone, replaced by someone who smiled easily and looked people directly in the eye. "It's done," Laura said, walking into the living room where Rose was reading. She held up the signed document. Rose looked up and a genuine warm smile lit up her face. "To new beginnings," Rose said, raising her teacup, and lit up her face. "To new beginnings," Laura echoed, clinking her cup against her sister's. "And to you. I couldn't have done this without you. You had the strength in you all along, Laura, Rose replied softly. You just needed someone to remind you it was there. Last week, Laura had aced an interview for the head archivist position at Columbia University's Rare Book Library. They had been impressed not only by her knowledge, but by the quiet confidence she now radiated. She was returning to the world she loved, but on her own terms. The sisters still had much to learn about each other and the circumstances that had separated them, but they had time. They had a lifetime ahead of them, a future they would build together. As the afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the two women sat in comfortable silence. They were two halves of a whole, reunited by a cruel act of fate, but bound by an unbreakable bond of love and loyalty. For the first time in a very long time, Laura Caldwell felt completely, utterly, and wonderfully free.